This episode of the City Manager Unfiltered podcast is sponsored by Holbrook Asphalt. Maintaining your roads is one of the most difficult tasks for any city government. The good news is the secret to making it easier is only 3 letters: HA5. HA5 extends the life of roads and reduces the financial burden on your taxpayers. HA5 is an innovative pavement preservation treatment trusted by over 300 public agencies. It keeps good roads in good condition, reducing repair costs and saving taxpayer dollars. Join the hundreds of other cities making the smart choice. Choose HA5 for longer-lasting roads and a healthier budget. Learn more at holbrookasphalt.com/city. That's holbrookasphalt.com/city. Check the show notes for a link. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Donald Duncan. He is the Caldwell County Manager. This is part 2 of our discussion on emergency management and response to Hurricane Helene that struck his county and much of North Carolina a little while back. Donald, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And, we did a lot of pre-interview discussions before the first episode and now the second one. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the good and bad, the ugly of the recovery and just sort of responding to this disaster, because it impacted you on a very personal level. It's very easy for us as managers. We get focused on helping the community and how do we, do what's right for our residents, our taxpayers, our businesses, the less fortunate. But oftentimes we don't think about the fact that you could be in a situation where you're responding to a disaster or a natural disaster of some kind, and it could impact you directly personally. And that's the case with you, right? So why don't you kind of share some of those personal stories and how this impacted you and your family?
I'll share a couple stories myself and some loved ones and some of my team members that I think are good life lessons. So it's Saturday, and we're 40 hours after the disaster hit, and we're in full blown response mode still. And I had pulled a 20-hour shift, and my staff's like, we're looking at each other going, all right, who's going home first? No, I'm staying. No, we're pushing each other out the door, and finally it's like, I'm the leader. I'm standing up. I've had enough. I'm going to tap out. Maybe somebody of these guys will get some rest. And so we did. We turned it over to another shift. And because, like I say earlier on, if you're an emergency management person, this is the Super Bowl. This is game day, right? You're hyped up, and you're not going to be the first one to walk off the field. So that's what had to happen. And right as I'm walking out the door, people are like, hey, good job, hugging you, you're grabbing something to drink. And you're about ready to walk into blackness. And what I mean by that is that we had satellite comms there, and we could talk. We could communicate with the outside world. No one else from our county could, and no one else west of us all the way to Knoxville, Tennessee, could talk to the outside world. It was radio silence except for a few key areas that had satellite comms, and we did. And remember, this early days on. And so I get phone rings, and it's like, holy shit. And it's my wife. I was like, how are you getting out? Cell phone. She goes, I don't know, but you got to come home. And what's happening? She goes, I got to go to the hospital. And so I take a breath, and I say, okay. And it's my daughter is in the background. Dad, come home now. Come home now. I was like, what do you need? She goes, I think it's a bad kidney stone. I'm like, kidney stone. Okay. We've all had them. This too shall pass, right? So I turn around to a couple of medics that are in there, and I said, check with the hospitals, see who you can get a hold of, and see who's got ER open, because our hospitals are down. And so Caldwell is completely flooded. Our local hospital is completely jammed up. No go. Next neighboring hospital in Valdez, Burke County, jammed up because their big hospital in Morganton is without water, without sewer, and without power. Their generators are out. And so they're decompressing to Valdez. So that's jammed up. I call a good friend. I was like, hey, can you get out? He's in another county. He's got comms. Can you find me a hospital that's open? Because when I walk out of this building, I got no comms.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, I got you. His wife's a nurse, very good nurse, trains nurses. So he's like, I'll call you, text me, whatever. He said, just, check me. I said, okay. So I go home, load up my wife. Now, remember, I've had no sleep. And I haven't told her this. I haven't said anything to her. We're just going to go. And I said, kids, you stay here, watch the house, no power, get in the car, and we start heading
What
east.
time of day is this now?
So this is about 7:30 at night at this point.
So it's not dark yet, but it's getting dark soon, right?
Yes, yeah. So we're still, daylight savings hasn't hit yet, but we're getting there. And so
And so you got to leave the kids at the house, empty
yeah,
house with no power, no communication. How old are your kids?
so they're 17 and
Okay.
14, and they're both very good young adults.
Okay.
They're wonderful
Old
people.
enough to burn the house down, but I was
Old
kidding.
enough, well, they're old enough to set the house on fire and try to put it out. I mean, I tell everybody, I said, I don't know what my daughter's going to do in life. I'm not sure if she's going to cure cancer or start a cult. So, and my son is the responsible human being. And
So,
so,
but it's got to be a little scary to be thinking about leaving your kids in this environment, even though they're teens and they're near adult age. That's got to be a little scary because you have no way of getting in touch with them, right?
correct. So I get out of the county and I get over to the next county and they've got some comms, right? Because like I tell everybody, we're at the edge of the crater. So this is where the hole starts in Caldwell. I mean, that's where you drop off and it just gets deeper and deeper. So I'm driving out of the crater and I get a signal when I get toward the city of Statesville. And so I call my buddy back. I was like, listen, I don't think she's going to make it to Baptist. She's in so much pain. And I've had kidney stones. She's had kidney stones. It's no big deal. You drink a beer and you go on, right? Not this one. Not this one. So, so he's like, hey, man, no joy. I just called my wife's hospital and another hospital, and they're jammed up. Everybody's decompressing. They're just pulling patients like crazy. And there's people sitting in the parking lots, triaging everywhere. So I called my physician friend. I finally get a hold of him. He's in 2 counties over. And I said, hey, I got to go to the hospital. Can you call ahead? I got you. Don't worry. He said, we're going to Iredale.
For illustration purposes, are you heading east or west or
I'm
north or
heading. I'm
south?
heading due east,
Due east.
and
Okay.
I
All right.
was ready to go to Baptist Hospital, which is a major research hospital based at Wake Forest University in Winston Salem. And so, in the interim, there's 2 hospitals on the way I was going to try, and she's just writhing in pain, and she's already taken some high powered narcotics to try to stop it. That was she had. So my wife's going to kill me for telling this story. So we roll up to the hospital, and it's a ghost town. They're like, everybody forgot about us. They're just passing us and going to the next hospitals. And so just the Lord looked after us, roll into the ER, 30 seconds to check in. She goes to the bathroom. They bring out a wheelchair. She's in the room. She's in the ER. Doctor comes in, starts doing assessment and says, okay, we're going to roll you back into radiology. We're going to check this out. Immediate service. There's nobody there.
Wow.
And I'm like, man, this is great. And I am running on fumes. I mean, I'm about to collapse. Right, the adrenaline from my wife being, telling me that she's hurting is
Sure.
wearing off.
But now that she's in the capable hands of the
Correct.
professionals, you're probably starting to get a little
I'm starting to
wind down,
drop.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
dropping fast. And so they rolled her back in, and they went, big stone, not going to pass it. Got to have emergency surgery. They said,
Whoa.
yeah. So it's so if you imagine most people's are like millimeters, hers is measured in centimeters. If that
Wow.
tells you anything. So like as big as your thumb.
Your
But
wife has
not,
great timing, by the way.
I'm telling you. So they're like, hey, there's nothing you can do. Head home, get some sleep. I was like, well, I'm going home to an empty house, So charging my phone up in the car kind of thing. Stop at McDonald's, 24-hour McDonald's, grab a quick sandwich, and I'm back on the road. I go home, crash into the bed, wake up, and the kids are cooking breakfast. We got gas heat, right? And so they're frying some bacon, and because it's going to go bad. So they're cooking some eggs. And it's like, all right, everybody, wipe down, get a cold shower because we still had water. Thank you to the city of Lenore. We didn't have hot water, but we had water. Most people didn't, so we're very thankful. And so we're washing, and before we get in the car, the phone rings, and she goes, "I'm going into surgery right now." And I'm like, "How have we got comms?" Like I hadn't had comms all night, but I get a phone call from her,
Wow.
and it's like, damn. And so one of the things we learned is that we had to switch our phones over to SMS messaging. And so by that, we could start learning to communicate because it's a lower bandwidth signal and it doesn't use broadband. So it's okay. It still uses kind of old cell technology. And so we're rolling and we finally get into signal and like, no answer. We roll into the hospital and we sit in the waiting room and I'm constantly on the phone with my commissioners, and I'm not telling them what I'm dealing with. I'm just like, hey, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. They were able to get out and they were able to get to locations in other counties and get comms. And so they're trying to call out and find people. I couldn't tell her mother because I couldn't reach her. I couldn't tell my family to come and look after my kids. They couldn't got out anyway. They're stranded. Like they're completely isolated. They went from 2024 to 1850 overnight, all of Western North Carolina. And it's great when you see the satellite imagery at night.
What do you mean? I'm drop 2024 to 1850. You lost me
So
there.
so when after Hurricane Helene went through, the first 30 days of Western North Carolina, for the most of it, unless you're on the edge of the crater like we were.
Oh, you mean the year 1850?
The 1850, yes, sir. The year there
Okay.
is,
Yeah.
it is gas lamps. It is, if you were fortunate enough to have a
Yeah.
generator, my dad had this big welder generator, and he was keeping things going. So, they were okay, because my dad's a mountain guy and he's prepared.
Old school.
Old school. So I roll up, pick up my wife. She's rolling out of surgery. They're like, "You're going home." And so I get her to the house, get her in the bed. Kids are watching her. We got mom. Power's back on. So we were okay. We're doing all right. And I roll back into work just like nothing happened. And I work a whole night shift.
Wow.
And that's just how we had to do it. That was the first couple of weeks. That's the way it went. And we had the EOC open. And we started relieving each other, and we started breaking into 12-hour shifts. Then we finally got in, all right, we're going to stay open 12 hours a day. And then we got back to normal hours over time. But then you're dealing with family, and I didn't know where my mom and dad was even alive.
How far were they located at relation to you? Break that down a little bit.
So the Western North Carolina is incredibly compact. It is a very small area, but it's mountainous. So if you want to go from one county to the next, that looks like 10 miles, but that's a 45-minute drive. You got to go over the river and over two mountains and around this mountain, And so for us, it's really close. It's only about 40 miles away, but you can't get there from here because all the roads are gone. You couldn't even, in most counties, the first 72 hours, we couldn't even land helicopters on the ground because everything was destroyed. And if you could get to a field or you could get to a rural airport, you couldn't get out of it. You could fly in, but you couldn't. You had goods, but you couldn't deliver them because the roads were gone. You couldn't get a truck to unload the helicopter. You couldn't get a forklift to unload a helicopter. It was insane.
Wow.
And so that's what we were dealing with. We were trying our best to make those kinds of things happen. And so I had a cousin that was in insurance, and he said, "Hey, I've been assigned Western North Carolina. I've got your county. What do you need?" And I said, "Hey, we're good. I got another company. We're already doing damage assessments. So I want you to go check on our family." He's like, "Yep, 10-4." He said, "How am I going to get there?" So he comes down and he goes around his elbow, drives for 4 hours and still can't get there. Turns around and comes back, goes up another road, goes into Virginia, comes in through Tennessee, and finally gets there to our home where we grew up, our hometown. I said, "But dude, when you get there," I said, "you check on all our family." I said, I need you to lay eyes on my mom and dad and my brother." And sure enough, 3 days later, he gets back out of the hole. He's out of the, this dark zone. And he says, "Yeah, everybody's good. Went and seen my mom and dad, your mom and dad, all of our cousins. We know everybody's okay. Some of our family friends." He said, "I saw about 50 people while I was there."
So this is literally old school 1850
Old school
style. You got a report from somebody who was there on site. This wasn't a phone call from mom and dad.
Correct.
This wasn't an email, text message. You didn't have you had no communication at all with your parents.
The best I can describe is like it's the dark side of the moon, right? When NASA's got the astronauts orbiting, all right, we're going radio silent. We're not going to talk for the next 30 minutes. Well, think about not talking for 30 days.
You went 30 days without being able to talk to your parents?
Correct. Yeah. So it was tough. Now we finally got SMS text messaging up and running in a few key locations, so people could drive to certain parts of their community and they could get some bandwidth. And so my dad figured out he could go to the Blue Ridge Escarpment, which is where the parkway is, and he was getting bleed over signal out of state, and that's how he could talk. And he figured that out, and we could text. But I didn't hear a voice for 30 days from my family, and some people went much longer.
So here's the thing, right? Like your parents are elderly.
They're getting older, yeah.
And he put eyes on them a few days after the storm.
About a week, yeah.
But that ain't a daily check-in, right?
Mm-mm.
So you weren't getting any reports on how they're doing until for like another 3 weeks, or did you get?
Yeah, I could get text messages, on occasion. Like we would send a message, and a day later he would come out and he would get to the escarpment where he could get signal from out of state. Like it's typically a signal from South Carolina, and he could. Now this is 100 miles away, but you're at 5,000, 6,000 feet elevation, so it's shooting up.
Yeah.
So he could send a text message and says, "Okay, this is what we know today." Da, 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 da. And it was very simple of kind of like, ship to shore communications was 100 years ago.
So how, I mean, this is kind of getting off in a tangent conversation here, but how were they able to survive that period of time? Did they have access to a local grocery store or
So,
whatnot? I mean,
so mom and dad are mountain people, and a lot of mountain people, and that's something everybody needs to understand. The mountain people are so resilient. Dad had a generator. He had an old big Miller welder, right? And it has a generator on it because it works off electric current. So he had wired it into the house. He had, stores of food. They had canned goods that they had made, so they were able to do that. They had gas grills. They had wood stoves. So they were able to survive pretty well. They weren't hurting for comfort. They just
wow.
couldn't communicate. And my brother, is a couple years younger than me, and so he was able to help, and he's close by. So I knew they had some protection, and so we felt pretty good. And so my dad, he's got tractors and shit, so he's over there helping cousins, and all of a sudden these people from Portugal show up, and they could barely speak any English. And they're like, "Hey, we're going to rebuild the bridge." And this is about 3-4 weeks after the storm. They show up and they got chainsaws and hammers, and they just start rebuilding private bridges across the streams and the
This
rivers.
is a Portuguese like humanitarian rescue mission.
Just showed up out of nowhere. And there's other great stories like that.
Pretty wild because we
Yeah.
never hear about stories. We always hear about Americans going to help some other country, right? When they're
Oh
going
yeah,
through something, we don't ever really hear about other folks coming to help us. That's pretty awesome.
yeah. Let me tell you about the Jordanians. That was the coolest thing. So we're sitting in the EOC and we're watching the helicopter. Which you remember the old TVs when the signal would go off. We called it the Nat fights, right?
Yeah,
That's what.
you're dating yourself, sir. You're
Correct.
dating
Yeah.
yourself because I'm 40, gonna be 48, and I don't know that one. But
So like if the TV goes without signal, it's like this thing, and it's just black and white. It looks like salt and pepper. We called it the Nat fights. So that's what the airspace over Western North Carolina looked like with all these helicopters we talked about in the last episode. And it's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So we would click on and we would look and say, okay, this is, flight so and so, and they're just coming out of here and they're headed here. We're just sitting there watching because our activity in the EOC is like, okay, there's no phone calls coming in now. What are we going to do? We're going to check on our friends. So we're checking on our friends and neighbors and making sure they're okay. And we're watching helicopters and who's needing what. And we're somebody needs something that we can help with. Right. So when you get bored, that's what you do. You're okay. My guys are deployed out. Do I need to go to another county? Is there something I can do?
right,
And so they click on this one and it's a Jordanian helicopter. And about that time, our 800 megahertz goes off and it's like, hey, we got the Jordanian military here on the ground in this little rural, and I mean, middle of nowhere fire department. What's up with that? And so these guys were here in the U.S. training with our U.S. forces, our special forces. And like, hey, you guys want some real experience? They're like, yeah, sign us up. And so these guys ran sorties for 5 days, back and forth, delivering, medicine, fuel, chainsaws, you name it, on a Jordanian helicopter. And everybody's
that's
like,
awesome.
you know,
Where were they
so
stationed? Do you remember where they were stationed out of?
they were near Fort Bragg.
Okay,
Everybody's there, but then they came and they were flying out of the Statesville airport, and they're hopping in and out, and then you'd see them up in Ashe County, and then they're over here in Collinsville, and then they're over here, in Yancey County, and everybody's like, "This is really cool." And they had a nice military grade helicopter, very sharp, and they could get into some tight spots where our Blackhawks were a little too big, and of course the Chinooks were too big. So, and that's another thing that people need to know is that you need to prepare to have LZs. Like we were tearing up college football fields like crazy, but you can't get heavy trucks in. So you need to have fields that have some impervious surface in part of them, and start being able to prepare to land big green helicopters. Now, when I say
right.
big green helicopters, I mean they need so a Chinook, right? The big twin rotor
The
things.
double, yeah, the double
Yeah,
propeller, right? Yeah.
these guys are huge, and the pilots are fantastic. They know what the heck they're doing, and they're going to land where they can put that thing down in. And you really need about 5 clear acres. Right? What county in a rural
You need
state?
5 clear acres
Yeah, and a
for a
mountain.
Chinook,
Yeah, now they can put them in tighter, but you got to think you got to have room for your equipment. You
right?
got to have room to
Unloading and all.
unload it.
Yeah, yeah,
So you got
yeah.
to think about all of the
Accessing it, right?
yeah
Yeah.
the accessory area. Now he can put it in downward, and a troop can walk out, right? But when you're trying to get a tractor and unload hay bales,
If you're also trying to get if you're trying to get rapid succession of drops coming in from multiple,
correct. Yeah.
right? The
You got to have
staging,
room to
right?
store it on. You got to have all the
Yeah.
staging areas. So I would tell everybody have an 8-acre usable site. And here's what you need it for. During disaster response, the U.S. military, National Guard, Title 10 folks can bring in more equipment than you can possibly fathom to do with. You cannot use it all. So you've got to have a warehouse, and you've got to have an 8 to 10 acre site, and you've got to have multiple ones in your county to get to people. And then after the major response is over and things start returning to normal, you got to do debris management. You need to turn those sites into debris management sites. You need that big an area to turn all the equipment around, to process debris, to unload trailers, and be able to grind and mulch or burn it. And then you turn around after that's all over, you restore that field and you get ready for the next disaster. That is something we never prepared for. We were always thinking about, air medical helicopters that need 2 acres cleared.
Right.
And when you're landing military grade equipment, it's not twice as big, it's 5 times as big. And the rotor wash is 5 times as big. And the staging area is 5 times as big. And so if your airport has a bridge to it and the bridge is gone, your airport
Airport's useless, right?
is useless. It's a giant piece of taxpayer waste at that point. So airports are incredibly important. We need to prioritize those as a community, as a local government, and we need to prioritize access to them. And we also need to prepare to have debris management sites and multiple helicopter LZs around our community. It's just got to happen. We failed to do that. We did some emergency stuff. We used our old. This is a great story. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We used our old community center that is an ag center, right? We've got these barns and fields and paddocks where you can put horses and cows and everything. And there's this big field that we use, for part swaps for cars. And so we had people bringing us round bales of hay all the way from New York. And
Wait. You said
yes,
hay bales from New York?
hay bales, these giant round bales, they weigh about 1,000
Yeah.
pounds a piece. They're about 7 foot across. And we're loading them. We figured out how to load them on a Chinook and how to unload them on a Chinook. So we had tractors. One would drive up beside the Chinook, and another one would come in and drive it in. And so it was like loading bullets in a magazine cartridge, but we were loading hay bales. Never
Wow.
been done in the history of the United States, but we figured it out here. They did a test flight. They flew to Salisbury and came back, and they refueled. And they said, all right, we're going to load here. We're going to fly back and forth. We're going to see if we can deploy this effectively to save livestock in western North Carolina. Somebody donated all this hay, tractor and trailer loads of hay, and brought it from New York.
Wow.
All the way to North Carolina. And then we had to figure out, all right, how are we going to get it there? What are we going to do? And so, when you don't have a truck, when Amazon can't make the delivery, right, what do you do? So we come up with all of these inventive little things, and it was just fantastic.
Donald, a slight little insert here. I didn't realize I going back to the first episode talking about Summerfield, and I won't go on my Summerfield rant, but I was talking to some residents in Summerfield, and lo and behold, I didn't realize that North Carolina has a huge cattle grazing sort of operation out there. I just didn't think of North Carolina. I think, honestly, being growing up in Southern California, I think of North Carolina, I think of the mountains, and I think of furniture. You know what I mean? I didn't know you guys have a big livestock out there.
So we're still very famous for furniture. We are a major livestock state. I think we're number 2 in turkeys or something like that, and like number 1 in chickens. And then cattle is a very important part of the state.
So saving that livestock and people's livelihoods is a big deal.
Oh yes, big deal, huge deal. A lot of your organic beef, come from rural farms, and so those rural farms are in small counties because they don't have these huge fields, and so they may raise 100 head or 50 head or 10 head of cattle a year, and that's going to be on a small family farm.
Yeah.
And that's what we saved. That's what we saved a lot of. I think another thing to think about is, and this is important, going back to my wife's surgery, is that then once, my in-laws figured out what was happening, my brother-in-law, he has a great story, and his is his own episode. I just can't do it. But he loads up my mother-in-law and his grandmother. Now, this is 96-year-old grandmother. And they says, all right, you can't stay here. You're not going to survive. You can't get oxygen. So what happens when oxygen runs out and there's no electricity? If you don't have an oxygenator, what happens when oxygen runs out, there's no electricity, and we can't get your vendor supplier to you because the roads are gone?
Yeah.
So what do you do, right? Nobody thinks about that. So we had people begging for oxygen. And so by this time we have power, and my brother-in-law says, I'm coming, I'm loading her up. And of course, a lot of us in emergency management drive Subarus. I'm not plugging Subarus, but it's because we need to get there, right? In our personal daily lives. We want something that will climb a tree. Go look. Just drive through the parking lot when you see emergency management folks in their personal vehicles. Look at what they drive. Okay. So brother-in-law shows up in his family Subaru's, got my mother-in-law and his grandmother. So I had refugees for 3 weeks, and we had to take care of them. And my kids were home. They were out of school, no school. And so the whole family's together, and we're living together and learning to do that. And so I stayed at work all the time, and it was a great motivator, to not have to be around my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law, but I give her a hard time. And
You had
and
a built-in
so
excuse, huh?
yeah, so I was coming home, and it's 9, 10 o'clock every night, and I'm back at work at 7, and that's just for weeks on end. And so I would come home, and we would sit there and just talk and have a good time because there was no internet still. We had sporadic phone service by this time she's there. We could still text with family, and it's every day is, can we find somebody? Can we find this person? Can we look for this person? Where are they at? So there was these massive rolls, these lists of people from all over the country looking for loved ones.
Yeah.
We had no way to manage that. And so one day, NCEM walks in and says, directive for this weekend. This is Friday night. By Sunday, we're going to clear the rolls of missing people. Everybody's job is now to start going and checking on folks. And so Caldwell County got a list of 170 folks that were missing, and we found them. I put 12 deputies with my sheriff. He's so good, so good. I said, Sheriff, can we just put a whole shift? This is all they do. So he brought in extra people, and we put some fire marshals on it, and he takes off and they go. And they start looking for people. So that's another thing that we had never anticipated. Managing, when you have no comms, because we're all away from copper now, and copper's down. I mean, there's entire networks of phone and power lines gone. So Blue Ridge Energy is one of our electric co-ops here in the mountains, and they're a fantastic group of people. They have about 1,200 power poles in their system. They had 800 on the ground.
They had 2/3 of their. Did you say 800
Gone.
out of 1,200 just gone, just leveled?
Gone. I mean, on the ground, broken, shattered, cut up, you name it. So the whole electrical grid was down. It wasn't like we could go and flip a breaker.
Right.
And then with those poles is all your fiber optic and what copper was left on the system, and it's all on the ground. And if the storm didn't take it out, we were cutting it in emergency services and throwing it on the side of the road. I went to Lowe's and had my guys, if you know anything about electrical installation, you can get these it looks like a pin, and it's a hot stick, and it detects if there's a circuit that's open, and it lights up red. It's a safety measure. I said, all right, all my fire marshals, all my fire crews on front lines that are helping clear roads, lead guy's going to have one. We're going to test every circuit before we cut it. And we're out there with bolt cutters. That circuit's dead, cut it. We got to go. Got to open a road. Got to be able to get a fire truck. Got to be able to get a dump truck in here, ambulance, what have you. So we called the company, said, we're going to cut these lines. Do it. Go. So, that's the kind of stuff you had to have, right? And so that took about 4 days before we're like, guys, we got to get into these people. We got to figure this out.
I can't believe you guys only lost one person. I mean, you think about it intellectually. Yeah, people have oxygen. You realize, like, when power's going out and everything else, it's like, how did you not lose more than one person? That's just crazy.
This is going to sound like a slight. This is not the case. Most of the people who died were not mountain people. 90% of them were not from there. They were not used to dealing with the extremes of the weather, and they did not respect the nature and how forceful water can be in mountains.
Right.
It's kind of like the same thing when you're in Palisades, right, with the fires that happen. It's hard to imagine how fast a fire can accelerate up the side of a mountain.
Right.
It's the same thing. Water comes down faster, right? And then when you have this giant funnel effect that we have in our canyons here, because we have a lot of box canyons in the Appalachians, we call them hollers, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah,
but I've never seen one. I've just listened to some country music songs.
Correct. So when you're used to that and you grow up with it, you have a different level of respect for it, and you have a different level of flight or fight response, and so that's what got a lot of people. And one of them was a wonderful family. They got their family out. They're a couple that my wife knows, young couple, and they go back to get some more belongings in their house. They made that fatal error. Is this worth it?
Oh, man. Yeah.
And so we found the wife about 30 miles away in Tennessee from North Carolina. Husband is yet to be found. So that's the kind of things, you deal with. I think another thing to talk about that is important, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the depression that set in, and I'm talking about societal depression. When you walk out of your home every day and you go the trek, and you have to have a four-wheel drive vehicle, and you're driving for 10 miles at least in a four-wheel drive vehicle, whether it's an ATV or a pickup truck or a Jeep or SUV, and just to go and get fuel and some groceries. And thank God for all the stuff that was donated. For if you donated something, money, food or fuel, we were so appreciative. You don't know how much. But when you walk out every day and everything you've known for your whole life is completely changed, right? Change is hard for everybody, but when
Right.
everything has been a massive change, my mother and I would talk once we got calls back, and we would talk about how depressed she was. So we did something unusual this year. We're going to we hosted Thanksgiving at my house. This is because our area was recovering well. We were ahead of the game, right? We were working hard at it, and we were hit less. And so even my PDMG, which is an acronym for your FEMA dude, that's
Okay.
housed with you, your FEMA guy that's like, on your right hip, that, if you got a question, they're there, and everybody can cuss FEMA all they want to. They're fantastic people, and I'll get more into that. But I said, hey man, are you here for Thanksgiving by yourself? Yeah, my family's in Alabama. I said, okay, you're coming to Thanksgiving
Yeah,
my
you didn't
house.
think about that, right? You're all these folks are away from their own families trying to help out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. They're not FEMA workers. They're all Homeland Security, State Department, et cetera. They're government employees. And they're like, all right, they sent out an email that says we need volunteers to go do this. And people's like, yeah, I'll sign up and go do it. I'll go into that disaster zone and meet people that are not like me, that are going to cuss me, that are going to threaten my life because I'm there just to help from the government. That's what those people signed up for. So don't you can say all you want to about FEMA, but here's the real deal. Here's where the rubber meets the road. Can you right now walk into your house and lay hands on your insurance policy? Do you know what it says in it? Can you get your hands on your birth certificates and your kids' birth certificates and your social security cards? Get in the car and leave right now. Can you do that? So a lot of this is our own preparation. It's our own fault, and then we
Or
expect
lack thereof, right? Yeah.
lack of preparation. We expect somebody to come in here and make it all better because we were not ready. So that's where the frustration with FEMA comes in. Is they sit down with you and say, "Hey, you've already gotten a letter from your insurance company that says, flood event, we're not paying for that. Sorry, you've lost half your house. Too bad." And then FEMA says, "All right, you've got to go through this very complicated government process in order to verify that the taxpayers' money is not going to be wasted. And then you're eventually going to get a check that's nowhere near going to cover what you've lost."
Right.
And that's why they hate FEMA. And FEMA is only following what Congress tells them to. So that brings up the part of like every day the rules change. So every day we get new alerts and says, okay, FEMA has now released funding for this program, and North Carolina Emergency Management, our General Assembly, has released funding to match those programs. So typically in any other state except for North Carolina and Alaska, you have a disaster hit your town and you've lost major infrastructure. Let's say your police department was blown up and your insurance is going to only cover, half the cost, right? Because the building inflation costs and you weren't properly insured. So it's a $2 million building. You're only going to get $1 million check from your insurance company. You can get some hazard mitigation money, and you're only going to get, I'm sorry, you're going to get public assistance money. You're only going to get 75% of that. You got to cover the other 25%. So hence the need for the bigger fund balance that I told you about earlier.
Yeah.
Well, in North Carolina, thank God to the great state of North Carolina, they cover that 25%. Us and Alaska are only two states that do that I'm aware of. Now, if somebody wants to correct us, please, let me know. But that's all what I'm aware of right now. So you have $1 million loss, you got to come up with 250. In North Carolina, the state, now you pay that 250, right? And the state reimburses you that.
Wow.
You get one check. FEMA sends it to the state sends it to the local governments. So thank God for that, or we would have been much worse shape.
Hey, Donald, can we go back to what you said a minute ago? Because I think it deserves a little bit more focus. I'm not sure what I can do or what we can do to maybe help folks or add value in this conversation. But I think you made a really great point that merits further just sort of discussion or expansion. And that is this idea that when you go through this natural disaster, literally lives in mass have been turned upside down on a
Yep.
personal level. But then they go outside of their immediate confines of their home if it's still standing, and their entire environment has been literally changed physically, and it's different, and it causes. I mean, obviously, it's been damaged or wrecked in many regards. I mean, the Palisades fire we talked about a couple times in these episodes is a wonderful example, right? The fires in LA County and what have you. Can you just speak a little bit more about just like what that does or how that impacts a community as a whole when just the whole world's just been turned upside down?
Yeah, I was in the middle of the game, right? I got to be in the eye of the storm, literally and figuratively. And so when you're talking to citizens and they're just shattered and I'm seeing all the good work that's going on every day, and I'm just so thankful of what everybody's doing, right? And so I didn't slow down and take it all in. And I'm sitting there talking to my mom, and I'm like, oh yeah. And so then I get a call from my brother, and it's football season, right? And he's like, hey, your nephew's been playing football. We're having to drive an hour and a half away to get to a football field we can play on. Now think about that.
Yeah.
You're driving all the way to Tennessee, and we got some roads open up now. And he says, hey, won't you come and see your nephew play his last game? And I was like, damn, okay. Yeah,
Didn't even think about that. You've missed the entire season, right? Because
yeah,
of you've been working
and
your butt off.
I've never seen him play, and he's a good little player. He's on a good team, and so I load my daughter up. I said, all right, we're gonna go watch your cousin play. Get in the car, and we start through the mountains and places I used to fish, places I used to go hunt with, girls I used to date, friends I used to hang out with, and I'm riding by, and it's just gone. It's gone. It's gone.
All the landmarks are gone, right? Every the
It is.
buildings, yeah.
It's like I've drove this road 1,000 times, and nothing is the same. It's incredibly surreal and depressing experience. And so I get to the stadium, and I'm sitting there, and I'm watching this game, and I can't think about nothing else. I'm thinking about all the disaster, and I drive back through it, and it's like, man, this is tough. And oh, and by the way, my daughter was learning to drive at the time, and she's still learning to drive. So I'm like, honey, you're going to drive, and this will be a great experience for you. We're going to go over some rough roads and all this stuff. This is stuff you need to know how to do. And so then I'm in the passenger seat, and I'm taking it in more than you normally would be.
Yeah, yeah. You can really look at it.
And you're like, yeah, there used to be a really cool little house that sat over there. And I remember, pulling into that driveway when I was dating a girl one night and had a kiss with her. And it's like that, there's no way to recover the memory as it was. Does that make sense? Because
It does. It
the
does.
trigger is broken.
I can relate in a way. This is gonna. I don't not to make this about me, but I've talked about this before on the podcast that I've had a really crappy childhood. My parents were drug addicts and spent time in jail and whatnot, and so
Yeah.
moved around and didn't have a lot of good memories. And I grew up in Southern California, which has had a massive explosion of population and what have you. And and I've talked to my brother about this. We've had some heart to heart conversations, and not through natural disaster, but just through the natural sort of growth of humanity and changing out of development of Southern California. All the places that I have good memories where I played little league baseball or whatnot, and did some things that were really fun or had good memories, they've all just sort of been leveled and replaced by a apartment complex or a city hall or something.
Yeah.
So is it? I can relate to that in some context, but I can't even possibly imagine where somebody who's grown up in an area or a region their entire life and just sort of literally just had everything obliterated. Like that just sort of just boggles my mind.
Yeah. I didn't, I was so disjointed from it, even though I'm in the middle of it, till I took the time to go do something else. And it was supposed to be a joyous occasion. And it's like, wow, everything is very different. And so there's a whole nother, I guess, chemicals in the brain that go off after that. But
It's almost like life pre-healing and after, right? It's like
yeah, I
maybe a
think
line of
so.
demarcation.
I think too, we saw a lot of survivor's guilt, and we had people just come and sit in my office and say, I lost a family member, and I lost a good friend, and it doesn't make sense. My house is gone,
Are they
and
talking
my
about
neighbor's
losing
house.
their lives as far as survivor guilt
Yeah,
in terms of not loss of
yeah,
life necessarily, but as far as the damage of the homes or losing their belongings or
both. Yeah,
yeah,
I had one employee here, and so their family in the mountains. They lost a really close family member, and it's like, but for me making a decision years ago, I would have been right there with them.
right.
And then what can I do to help them now? And so there's a lot of that survivor's guilt that has happened that people had to process through. So we, early on, we had what I call the all hands meetings, and we started with that Zoom call. And then of course we lost internet, right after we started. And so I got messages out to everybody, and we were doing SMS, or we were seeing people person to person. Tell your folks, tell your friends, meet here every night at 6 o'clock. We opened up this big training room we had. We could just seat 300 people. And we said, meet here every night at 6 o'clock until we get through this. And so in those meetings, we would cover, everybody had a role. Everybody had a role. Nobody's just too little. And the politicians could come in if they wanted to say something. They were all welcome. And I led the meetings, and we always ended the meetings with, hey, number one, celebrate every victory. I don't care. One day was, hey, we got a secure fuel supply for the sheriff's department, and we're like, that's great. We're all clapping. And so, one day was something really small, like we got a road cleared to get to a radio communications tower. And I didn't know how important it was till later. And they're telling me, yeah, if we lost that tower, like, everybody in this work zone would have lost half of their frequency in their comms. So we would have lost a lot. It would have shut down emergency response basically for all of Western North Carolina. That was like the one of two choke points, and we would have shut that off had we not got that fixed. And so it was a big celebration. And then the second thing is right, check on your team. Constantly check on your team. Make sure they're okay. Don't just ask them if they're okay, because we started this thing is like, hey man, how you doing? I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I know you're not.
How you really doing, right?
Yeah, how
Yeah,
you really doing?
don't give me the expectation.
And,
Yeah, yeah.
and so we started that, and then so we brought in. We were luckily we got some volunteers, and in our EAP program sent us some folks that would do mental health debriefings. And so I said, okay, standing order for everybody. If you see somebody needs something, bring them here. And so I started off with all my emergency responders, and then it's like, grab a citizen. If you see somebody that's not doing well, that's struggling, or you feel that they're struggling, bring them in. Put them in a county car, put them in your personal vehicle, get them here before this gets too bad, because we can't handle loss of life too that are inadvertent. Right? We don't want the tertiary effects of depression setting in.
Hey, Donald. I know you loved your staff and you're very proud of your team and whatnot. And can you just expand a little bit more on, from a leadership perspective, maybe some tips, advice, context, perspectives when it comes to looking in on your staff, checking on your staff, and just can you just maybe riff on that a little bit more as far as what you've learned through that experience? Because it's very easy for it to be go, 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 right? Focus on the mission, and yet without your team, nothing's going to get done, right? But you need the first responders, obviously all the way down to the first responders, but on your immediate impact as far as your executive team and your support staff, can you just sort of maybe give some insight into what you learned through this whole experience and how you work with people and manage your people?
Yeah, so that as part of that old hands on deck, the kind of the second element that I skipped over was show appreciation and gratitude for all team members. Find some way to thank somebody and be genuine about it. And so when we did that as a team, and I tried to set examples, and I would try to do it publicly, not make a scene, but say, just walk up to somebody and say, I thank you. I appreciate you being here, or thank you for what you did today. Right? Nobody else knows it but you and I, but I know what you did. And so then it was a very powerful tool in very tense times. So we would kind of be getting on each other's nerves, right? We even had one guy, he's great. He's getting older. He's a salty dog, and the hearing's bad after years of riding the back of a fire truck, and he's the old guy, with the cyborg headset, and he's talking 10 decibels above where he should be. So we made up a sign, and we'd hold it up, inside voice, Jeff. And everybody's like, it's just, all right, number one, let's take conversations out of the hallway. Right. Let the EOC continue to function and flow. There's enough chaos as it is. Don't add to the chaos. And so I always took those times as I would watch. And I said, when that person's wrapping up that call, I'm breaking off what I'm doing. And I'm going to go over and say, hey, man, I know that's a tough call. I appreciate what you're doing. Just, I heard, I know you're fighting through it. I know you're dealing with some vendor or somebody that's not doing what they need to be doing. They're not here on time. They're showing up and they got more than we can handle. Because that was typically what's the response is. It's always more than you can handle, right? What do you do with a truckload of apples that somebody just says, hey, you guys need these?
Yeah.
What do you do with a pallet full of body bags, right? What do you do when somebody pulls up and says, I'm donating a truckload of brand new boots and shoes for workers?
Yeah.
What do you do with
How
that,
do you
right?
process all of it? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just rolling in, and it's not like, hey, there's this one happened this week. It's 5 and 6 like that a day, and we're one of 30 counties that's affected like this, and so we're helping do all this stuff. So every time you get those chance to thank somebody, and then the follow up is that, I know what you're going through, anything you want to talk about. So the great thing, if you're smart about how you lay out your EOC, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. Have breakout rooms, and just say, we're going to take this breakout room team. We're going in here. Let everybody keep running. We're going to go in here and sit down. And there was a series of offices around us, and the favorite one was the health director's office, which is like a straight shot to my left. right down the hallway through 2 doors, and we could be in our office. Big, had a big couch, had a little table, good view of the sheriff and the jail. Not anything pretty, And so you're sitting there and going, hey, all right, we need to back down, and you're always the first one to lead it off, and I'm the first one to apologize. I'm the first one to accept blame, right? Because if you're going to be leading this team, that's what he has to do it. And normally the manager wouldn't be sitting in the middle of the EOC, but just as the world happens, right, nothing ever works out just right. We had a new emergency services director who's a great guy, and his community was hit the hardest. His was this ground zero for Caldwell County, and he's like, man, I need to be in the field. This dude's brand new to this role. I mean, he's interim for 4 months, and I just appointed him to begin in September, and we have, a Category 2 hurricane hit the county, first time ever. And it's like, I need to be there. It's like, all right, I'm taking your seat in the EOC. You're going to be ops command. Roger that. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, what did I just say? I was like, all right, we're flying. We're going to fly. We're going to go. And IC looks over at me and went, nice call. Let's go.
And that was you just taking care of your person because you like, hey, I know this person. They need to be. They're not going to be here right now, right?
Correct. There's no way I would have got 100% out of him. And if I let him go do what he desired to do, what he was capable of doing,
it's going to be better.
He worked till he dropped. I mean, he would come in and there's just mud and there's blood and there's filth, and he hasn't had a bath because there's no water, there's no electricity for days, right? And he's like a pig in slop, just so happy. Right? Yeah. Because he's there, he's with his people, he's leading them, and they're seeing it. And so you've got to be able to, you got to know your people well enough to make that call, and you've got to be emotionally intelligent enough, and you've got to be vulnerable enough. Being vulnerable is not a liability. Now, it can be if you're just complaining all the time. You can't be the guy complaining, but you have to be able to make that human connection, and your people have to know you care, right? And if they don't feel it and they don't feel it's genuine, they're not gonna follow you. They'll follow orders, but they're not going to follow you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not asking for a team of followers. I'm trying to build a team of leaders.
Yeah.
If I fall out, this guy can step up and keep right on going.
Yeah, Donald, can you speak to a little bit of the mindset that it takes to prepare yourself for the recovery process? Because, something that we see time and time again in this country, well, humanity, right, is that there's a disaster, there's a traumatic event. Let's even take it down to the granular level, right? You have say a woman who loses her husband in a car accident, or a husband loses his wife and kids in a tragic, DUI accident or something, right? And there's that immediate outpouring of support. People are there. They want to offer, what can I do? What can I do? But we all know that, after a week, after 2 weeks, or after a month, our life goes back to being normal to a degree, but that person's left struggling for the rest of their life in many ways, right? The recovery process can take months, years, what have
Correct.
you. Can you maybe put that into the macro sense from an organizational standpoint, and you as a leader, and how you kind of look at that and how you process the recovery and mentally prepare yourself for the organization? What's your thoughts on that?
So you guys that have been doing this a while will remember a thing called Hurricane Hugo. It was the first Category 1 to hit a major metropolitan area outside of Florida. So when you had, Charlotte, North Carolina gets hit with a major inland hurricane, and it just totally devastation. And that happened in 1989. And I remember going down as a kid, running chainsaws for 3 days and no bath, helping my aunts, cut out trees and drag brush. And that was kind of my first big disaster, right? And so years later, here I am as a town manager, and I'm a young town manager, this new, and this document arrives on my desk, and it's the closeout paperwork for the town of Troutman, 13 years later. So when you want to talk about recovery, you have to think about recovery in scales of time. This will take decades. It will affect people for the rest of their lives. Nothing's ever going to be the same. It's no different than COVID. We will never know the full extent of COVID until generations after people have wrote, their doctorate thesis on it many, many times. So you have to prepare mentally that you're in this for the long haul. And I don't think a lot of people grasp that. I don't think they think about it. And so I think we talked about Buncombe County and their long-term recovery, but then there is the personal recovery. And so one of the things I learned, and I'll tell anybody, is that we are not physically prepared as a nation. And when I say physically, health-wise, to handle repetitive disasters. You need to be in really good physical shape. Think about this. You live in uh, Yancey County, North Carolina, and Yancey County was probably the hardest hit, and that's where a lot of my family's from and my wife's family's from. And I'm from Mitchell, next door, and so if Buncombe County is on the news as ground zero, the next level down negative is Yancey County. That's how bad. I mean, they lost almost every bridge in the county. And so if you're a 75-year-old man and you're diabetic, what do you do when there's no electricity for 45 days? Are you physically able to get out and go and get your diabetic medication? And if you can make it to town, which is a 20-minute drive on a normal day, an hour drive in disaster scenario when there's no roads, and you can't store your diabetic medication, what do you do? So then translate that to mental health is how do we as managers and professionals take care of ourselves enough? So, there's times where I just get on the rowing machine and I zone out and I forget what I'm doing. And I get up and I can't walk because now I know that I need to be physically fit and mentally prepared enough to walk into that EOC and build this team. And so what do you do as a society? How do you prepare your society for those kinds of things? And I don't have the answers. But I think we need to think about it as you need to be constantly preparing yourself for the next one. Well, you buy antivirus for your home PC, right? To try to keep some bad guy from getting your stuff. You go and you do, if you're a health person, you go and you walk or you do some type of exercise. You try to maintain your heart. You take your medicines. You take your vitamins. We need to get into the aspect of mental health preparedness, especially as a profession.
I think the interesting thing, Donald, is that, and not to go on a rant, but in our society now, and we're guilty of it in our household. We're so used to, not only has our entire way of economic commerce shifted to just in time deliveries
Yes, sir.
and we learned the repercussions and negatives of that during the COVID disaster with the supply chain and how it was so easily disrupted because there was no depth to it, right? It was just either it was in the system, and if it wasn't in the system, then it wasn't in the system, and so we had a huge shock. But we have that just-in-time sort of approach to our delivery and supply cycles, and then we have this immediate need for instant gratification in our lives today, right? Like in our house, it's my wife loves ordering on Amazon because it's there the next day. Maybe it's there the same day. I don't even know. I mean, it's so we have this. We are not mentally, put aside the mental health thing that you just talked about a second ago. We are mentally just not even prepared to even process or handle being without creature comforts for any meaningful period
Oh,
of time. I
yeah.
mean,
First
it's
world problems, man.
I
I'm just
know.
telling you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because we didn't have internet, the first 48 hours, people were losing their minds.
I bet.
They had no entertainment. They had no comms. Then they're like, I can't take care of myself. I'm mentally agitated, and now I can't take care of my family. And so we saw a lot of that. I mean, people were just wandering aimlessly around stores, and they couldn't even buy anything. And then you go to the grocery store that's flooded, and they're shoveling it out with skid steer loaders and dumping it into trash trucks
Yeah.
because the food spoiled because we couldn't get it out fast enough. What was really cool is the outpouring of support for our utility linemen. I mean, everybody's calling me like, "How do we feed our linemen? How do we feed our linemen?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Don't feed them. Don't feed the bears, right?" And they're like, "That's inhumane. We want to help." No, listen, they get fed a huge breakfast in the morning, and they're at breakfast at 6 a.m. and it's light by 7 a.m. and they're going to work till 7 p.m. and they're going to go in and get fed a huge supper because they
They
can't
don't eat
take
all
the
day.
time. They cannot take the time to shut down because the network was that bad. When your entire power
God
grid
bless
is
them.
destroyed. So when you want to, you want to thank somebody. Yeah, my firefighters are out there working hard. My medic guys are out there working hard. Everybody's responding, but our utility crews, you just cannot fathom. And when you look over the street and you see that truck has a Canadian tag on it, and that truck has a Kansas tag on it, and that truck has a Texas tag on it, and like these ain't even our people. These are people that come here to help us and thank them. That's what you do. We had to tell people to stay away from utility crews. Don't go up and
Don't
offer them
feed the
stuff.
bears. Don't
Don't
feed the
feed the
bears.
bears. Leave them alone. Let them
Let
do
the
their
men work.
job. Yeah.
And women.
Think about trying to find hotel rooms and there's no power, right? There's no power, so you couldn't even bring your utility crews in. And everybody that lost a house or the house had a tree on it is in the local hotels before the utility crews get here. So we had linemen driving like 50 miles away to come to work every day.
After putting in a solid 12, 14 hours or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
and so we had huge problems trying to find temporary housing for those guys. It's just incredible. So what they did was just superhuman.
We're getting to the end of this episode a little bit, Donald. I guess we're kind of have to wrap it up here in a minute, but I kind of wanted to hit you with something. Do you see, with this being such a monumental, once in a lifetime, once in 100-year type event, have you guys at the local level? I mean, I know you're still in recovery mode, obviously, but has there been any attention or thought given to, okay, what can we do to learn from this as far as and getting this information out? Obviously, you're on the podcast and you're sharing this, right? But there's a lot of things that you've learned from your experience that we need to download to collectively, right? From all the
Great.
leaders who are involved in this process, right? Little things like, I mean, even as crazy as it sounds, like the lock, the file cabinets and having those available to store information, right? Things that you weren't
Who
even
knew? Yeah.
possibly prepared for, right?
Yeah.
How do we sort of get this information out and download it so the rest of the
So
country?
a couple things that I would tell anybody is number one, there's great checklists and start your checklist now on your own and then call somebody else and what's your checklist so I can build mine better. And one of the checklists that I have, and we have a huge whiteboard where I started it on day 3. I said, everything that goes wrong that we need to fix, put it on this board. Everybody has a marker. Don't let me be the only one writing shit up here.
Right. So we can
It's,
document it and learn from it, right?
and so the IMT guys from FEMA, and all over the nation, and our NCEM walk in one day and go, "What's that board?" I said, "That's all the stuff we got to fix." And they start taking their cameras out and taking pictures. They're like, "Yeah, this is nobody else is doing this." I said, "We need to know what we do. We need to fix what we've broken or is broken." And so one of the big ones was redundant comms. Everybody's on 800 megahertz after 9/11. You still need UHF, VHF. You need to know how to do SMS text messaging. You need copper lines. You need redundant fiber. You need your local, what we used to call them the Civil Air Patrol, whatever they were. These guys, the ham radio operators.
I've been meaning to ask you, I keep on forgetting during these episodes. How did the ham operators do? I assume they did well.
They did well. We didn't need them, but you got to remember my comms guys were operating 3 counties at one time because they were completely dark, and we still had backup redundant fiber. Guess what? We didn't even know we had it.
What do you mean?
We're in the middle of the emergency, and we're dark. We can't even dispatch. We can't take phone calls, and we're like, what are we going to do? And so we call this one guy, and on the radio, and we're like, hey, we can talk radio to radio. What do we do? Well, you guys got some consolettes back there. Go plug them in on this thing, and we're like, click, 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 and we could start dispatching again.
Wow.
We were only down for about 30 minutes, but it was like panic mode because we hadn't practiced. So practice, right? That's another thing. Practice,
But practice with intent, right?
practice with intent. Yeah, practice is if Air Force One crashed and somebody just found the real Bigfoot and somebody just got shot next door. Right? Throw all these crazy things that can't happen together and see what you do, and that's how you've learned your stress of your limits. Pre-planning and logistics and comms. Pre-planning is really important. Know what your assets are. Know what your asset. Have an asset management list. We had this piece of equipment over in facilities maintenance that absolutely made wonderful work of being able to pick up trees and move it. Never been used for that, but one of my fire marshals figured it out. And this, by the way, be safe. Practice employee safety, real employee safety. I had a fire marshal. I love this guy to death. He got burnt bad. The fire marshal gets burnt. There's no irony in that at all. He goes home, tree's on his truck. He cuts the tree up, lays it over to the side. A couple of days later, he goes and gets some diesel, and he thinks, but his wife had ran to the store and filled up every gas can. And she filled up the diesel can with gas, and he pours it on the fire and lights it.
No.
He gets burned up. We got 2nd, 3rd-degree burns. So knowing your team, I call our medical director who's at the hospital, and I said, you will go to his house and you will treat him because he was released too quickly. And sure enough, he had already set up infection. And the medical director calls back, hey, man, that's a good call. Because this guy's super tough, right? This guy's fire marshal. He's a super guy. Yep. If you go down, he's the one you want working on you. He's the one you want dragging you out of the building. And I'm tough. I can take it. And he was too tough. Relationship building is key, absolutely key. Know the phone numbers in your Rolodex of people you're going to need in the middle of a disaster. Don't and go to lunch with them. Break bread with these people. Know who they are, and then the next thing you do is you call and you ask for help. I never will forget. I called this one guy. I said, "Hey man, we got this entire community's without water. We've rode the circuit. We think if you guys just flip one thing, we're going to have water back on because that water tank's dry over there, and these people ain't had a bath in 3 or 4 days. Can you hook us up? Can you divert a crew over there just to check out what we think we're seeing?" Sure, man. I'll take care of you. 3 days later, hadn't heard from him. He took care of me. Call him up and say, "Hey, how you doing? You okay? How's your family? Are you okay?" Don't be a one directional
Right.
relationship.
Don't be take, right?
Correct. You got to make sure those folks are all right. One of my favorite friends at Duke Energy, uh, right after the storm, she gets off the thing down, and so I called her and I said, "All right, I know your phone's ringing off the hook. I'm not calling to ask you for anything other than I want to know you're okay. I need to know you're okay." And she starts crying,
Yeah.
right? And I cry. She cries some more, and I cry some more. And it's like, yeah, you're working 18, 20-hour days, and you're just trying to help somebody. You're burning out faster than you realize. But check on your people. Check on people that aren't your people.
Yeah.
Managing volunteers, we hadn't even got to.
Yeah.
Uh, Disinformation management. I've never seen so many scam artists in my life trying to take advantage of this situation. And they literally will walk up and take a free thing off of a trailer or somebody donates to them, and then they will go and put it on eBay. And then I've seen people telling you that all these disasters happening, and they're just trying to get TikTok views so they can generate some
Yeah.
sort of income. And they're out there walking around, and they're nothing but in the way and taking advantage of people.
Bunch of parasites.
It is a huge parasite society. We've got to stop. So I think another thing we need to talk about is hazard mitigation. That is such a huge project. So when you're talking about wrapping up, a FEMA disaster, the next thing is this flow of money for hazard mitigation. You are not a pro. I don't care how many disasters you've had. I've done this for a while. I've got people that have done it dozens of times, and we still need help. So get professional help. There's great consulting
Are
firms
you
out
talking
there.
about for grants and stuff like that, or
Yeah,
when you say okay?
when you're doing this grants management, it's follow up like we got to repair this field, or we got to get a generator for an EMS base, or this piece of equipment, we need to buy because we can use it. Hazard mitigation money. We need to fix these streams, right? We got to do all this debris removal out of streams so we don't have more localized flooding later. All of that costs millions of dollars, and at the very least, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You need professional help. You need somebody that's sitting there, just sitting on top of the financial management. Because guess what? You got to go back and run a county or a city and do your normal job. You
Right.
need people that are just doing this solely for you, and you can get that reimbursed. You can get it paid for. Get professional help. Uh, I think there's a couple other things I'd want people to know, but we mentioned debris contracts. Get your own debris contract and make sure it's up to date every 2 years. Make sure
I
you
think that's
have
a
it.
good that's a good takeaway from this episode is make sure you don't just set it and forget it, right, on those
Correct.
contracts.
And a lot of people don't know where it's at. They can't lay hands on it. Every 2 years, look at it. Have prearranged engineering contracts that you may already have an engineering relationship, but you need to have another engineer every 2 years put out an RFP. So you can call somebody and say, "Hey, this bridge is out and it's not ours, but they're going to need help and we can get this reimbursed. We'll get our money on the back end. Go help these folks out. Go
Yeah.
figure it out."
Yeah.
And get professional help and have those prearranged relationships and revisit them often. I think the cool thing is everybody has a role to play, and I can't imagine them not doing this without this wonderful staff that I built. I mean, my leadership team. I'm just going to tell you,
Please
I,
take a moment to talk about
I,
them. Yeah.
I will tell you right now, I'll put them up against anybody on this planet. My leadership team, they are not paid well. We only have culture and we have stability, and they have come in here and put things together that I never would have believed. Our ag extension director, Seth Nagy, figured out how to unload hay from helicopters, right? Our local guys in the Forest Service, our North Carolina Forest Service, those guys, they get paid pennies. And they're out there working their tails off and keeping roads open and doing stuff that we were out of gas. And they're just going at it like they're fighting fire, and they do that. Our transit system director, Michael Bowman, one of my former interns, Air Force veteran, I called him up. I was like, hey, man, if I need to evacuate people, how many buses can you get me when? And because this is another really cool thing is like if you're the disaster zone, we kick people from a home and we put them in a shelter. You don't have the manpower to also man that shelter. You need outside help. So what I would advise any municipality, any county, if you're not in the disaster, stick your hand up and say, I'm going to open up a shelter for you. You get your people to me.
Oh, that's
You worry
nice.
about that. Is one of the worst conversations I had is when the manager called me and said, how can I help you? And I said, I need you to open a shelter because my people are out here fighting this. Sorry, I don't know how to do that. I mean, obviously just disavowed our whole relationship. Never been madder in my life. And I was bringing home my wife from the hospital and had that conversation, by the way. My library director, she raised her hand and said, we're going to have a flood of volunteers coming in to help people, and you need to be able to vet volunteers. Jimmy walks up and he's got a chainsaw and he's going to start cutting, and then all of a sudden he says, yeah, Miss Sparks, I fell and got hurt. I'm going to turn it on your insurance. Or Jimmy walks up and says, yeah, that'll be $500. And says, oh, it's a little more work. It's going to be $2,000. Scam artists are crazy. So what we did is we pre-screened volunteers. I set up 2 police officers, one
It's
from an
just so
orthopedic.
crazy to even think you have to navigate these issues. I just,
Oh, and everybody's looking to the government, you, to verify these people are okay. So we said, all right, all volunteers check in at our local library. Our librarians are sitting there. You guys are going to run programming, and your main job is now to help do background checks. And so I had a police officer and a sheriff's deputy at both my libraries. And anybody that walks in, they're going to take care of the paperwork. You're going to do a quick background check through NCIC, and you're going to get a little card that we can print off and says you're cleared to go out into the field. And if anybody questions it, here it is. Here's your name, number, and they can call us to verify you. It works so well. Not every community has that initiative. My EDC director, Ashley Bollick, God bless her, she didn't know what to do. She's like, I'm here to help. I want to be involved. So we said, we need a warehouse. Go find us a warehouse. Comes back in 12 hours. Got you a warehouse. Here's the rent on it. 90,000 square feet, way below market. These guys want to donate it. We're basically paying half market price. Boom. Call FEMA up. Get it. We need it now. We're sending stuff to you. When can you be open? They're sending us tractor trailers before we got the lights turned on.
that's amazing.
And so then she goes out and says, hey, FEMA needs a long-term shelter for this region. Can you go find us a shelter? On it? 48 hours later, contracts are signed. I mean, you got to think.
What's her name? Ashley?
Ashley Bollick, and so how do you deal when your EDC director walks up and says, I want to be a part of this response?
Yeah.
And you're sitting there going, I don't know what the EDC director can do. Got it, And so it's like she took it and ran with it. Done fantastic. Building inspections. Jason Murphy is like, all right, go out and start doing damage assessments day one. Go as far as you can go. Document as much as you can document. And then he's like, we need to start waiving fees before we were told to start waiving fees on people trying to just get back in their homes.
Right.
So we started that process, and he was fantastic about it. All of my department has just, absolutely wonderful people. Of course, my emergency management team, Jeff Caldwell, Nathan Elliott, who was never really in that role, was in paramedicine. And we said, all right, Nathan, you're a planner. What's that? Read this. You're the planner. You start managing logistics, and you're helping Jeff. Got it. Okay. Took off. Guy got a promotion out of it. Had an intern. And this kid is very politically connected across the state in the Republican Party. Hunter Clark, and school's canceled, college is canceled. He's like, I'm gonna come to work. All right, you're sitting here. You're now my political officer. You just got a field promotion. I need your contact list, and I need you to start calling this congressman staffer, this liaison,
Yeah.
this, and this. A city council member would walk in, a county commissioner would walk in. I said, you're on them. You make sure they get their questions answered, get what they need, and do it now.
Yeah.
He said, yes, sir, I got it. And I said, I want them all having the same message. He would type it up. We would print it out, give it to him. If you talk to a senator, state representative, congressman, here's what you say and here's what we need. And it was like, boom, got it. I've got something I can do to help my fellow man, and I can do that. And so I was like, they're like, can I put this on my Facebook post? If you can get a signal, yes, tell them this is what you're doing and what we're asking for. So they loved it, right?
Yeah.
They just had
because people want to help. They just need a way of doing it.
And they like to talk to people, right? They're politicians. That's their role. Give them a duty. Now, I had a couple, I'm not going to lie, come in and say, hey, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing that. Great. Sit down right here. Here's a phone. Start calling these numbers. Tell them this. 15 minutes later, I got to go check on mom. All right. See you.
Get
we
too many
found
in
out
there.
who we
Yeah.
found out who the real men were real quick. Like I ain't coming to work. No, you show up in my EOC, you're coming to work, or get out of my EOC.
Well, hey, I want to kind of wrap this up a little bit by sharing some news that you're going to be starting a new chapter in Asheboro, right? You're going to become a city manager in Asheboro, North Carolina. And I'm just kind of wanted you to maybe walk through that process a little bit because it must be a pretty emotionally challenging time for you to be thinking about going through this entire ordeal with your team. And then now you're going to be starting a new journey.
Yeah, there's those thoughts of grief, which is where I just got over, and then before that, there was this nagging thought that I have built this team, and now I'm leaving it, and I'm betraying my team, and it was all through this whole process, and so you're
But this
getting,
this I want to make sure we're clear because you shared with me in that pre-interview. This
yeah,
journey to start a new chapter was already in motion long
correct,
before this ordeal, correct?
correct, yeah, that was already started, and then this happens, and I'll be honest with you, I got a couple calls from some locations, and they're like, "We'd like you to come and interview." I said, I can't leave this team right now. I, and I don't know that I would have gotten the job, may have, but I definitely turned down several interviews, because I said I can't walk away from this team. I just can't do it, and so I had to get over that process. And you build a team that trusts you, you trust them. There's this intrinsic feeling, right? That's sometimes the word escaped me, but I feel like there's a bond that no one else has between you and them. And
Yeah.
people like my health director, Anna, who Anna Martin, and now Anna Cook, she's got married, fantastic lady. She is always Johnny on the spot. And you'd think your health director would not be involved in emergency management, but after COVID, health directors became the
Front and
soul of
center.
emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah, So she rolls up and says, "This is a storm. I've got a role to play. I don't know what it is, but we're going to do it." So she describes her team and says, "All right, number one, we're taking care of food for everybody. Number two, we're going to go out and inspect every nursing home and make sure the old people are going to survive this. And number three, I'm going to go out and inspect every restaurant because we were without power. And I don't, they're going to lose a lot of food. And my job is to work 24 hours a day till they get open and business is back up and running." And I went, "Sounds good, Chief." Right. She took it on her own. I didn't have to
Right.
say, "Can you help me?" And then I walk in one day and I was like, "Can you guys start doing well testing?" "Why well testing?" I says, "Well, we've got so many wellheads that have gotten flooded, they're going to be contaminated. I don't know anything about it." So she pulls it up, researches it. Yes, that's in her purview, takes off and goes. We reported up the chain in the web EOC. This is what we're doing. 30 minutes later, state directive, everybody go out and check on wells.
Yeah.
All right. That's the kind of team that we had, that we could do this and move and move fast. And we were actually setting policy by our actions. We didn't know it until later, but that's what was happening. We were moving so fast. All right, I need my mapping department. Josh, my tax administrator, Josh Angel, get the mapping department together. We need flyovers now from our mapping contractor. And dude, he went on. He's a preacher's kid, so he knows how this rolls, right? Some of these preacher's kids have got the most backbone I've ever seen. Blows my mind. He is ripping these guys and saying, "Hey, you signed a contract. You're going to be there for us in an emergency. Get the planes up. We need to do damage assessments now.
Yeah.
And don't just do us. Start flying all of our neighbors, right? Send us a bill. Well, it's a little class. No, we don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear it. Get your ass up in the air." And he's cussing them out. And he is laying into them. He would come in and get on satellite phone, and he's talking to the guys in Utah. And I can't say too much bad about them. They finally got there, but we had to have a serious motivation. It's like, dude, this is the largest natural disaster in U.S. history at that point, till Palisades, and you're missing out. We're relying on you.
Yeah.
You know,
Step up.
yeah, step up. And they're like, okay, all right. Finally, we convinced them. And so walking away from that team, in the middle of all this, and you're getting the newspapers and professional organizations calling saying you're doing such a great job, and you're getting your peers patting you on the back and saying thank you for everything you're doing, and you're about ready to walk out of here.
Yeah.
It's tough, and it's real tough. And you've got a couple commissioners that are there just, "Hey, go team, go." You got other local electeds saying thank you for helping us out. You got other town managers going, "Man, we had no idea what we were doing. Thank you." And I said, "Yeah, I never will forget this in a meeting where the town manager says, just thank you. I mean, I had no idea what was happening." So I was sitting in your seat 20 years ago in the county. We had a natural disaster, and I was left to my own devices. I had one person call and say, hey, I got a lot of problems, but I'm just checking on you. What do you need from me? And it was Tracy Jackson. He was the emergency service director in Iredell County at that time. No one else called to check on us. Tracy's now working for the Association of County Commissioners as a contractor, and his job is to come and check on all these small town managers and county managers and saying he's been there. He's retired. He's got the gray hair. So, it's conflict. And when you have internal conflict, your health suffers. Right. And at the same time, I had heart surgery in the middle of this. I went through Helene, and in 30 days later, I'm at Baptist Hospital having heart surgery.
I didn't know that. You didn't share this with me. You're dropping this on me now with the audience. So you had heart surgery 30 days after Helene?
Yeah. And so I walked back into EOC after I come home, and I spent one day at the house, and I was like, I can go sit in the EOC and I can check on everybody. And my team's coming up and going, hey, man, do you need trees cut at your house? Do you need us to do this? Like, no, don't do that, because I don't want the perception given to my commissioners that I'm getting any favor.
Preferential treatment, yeah.
You just don't want that, right? You don't want that perception. And I had over 20 trees down in my yard. And so you're sitting there going, I have to think about the bigger picture here, because I knew that I would give some of my folks an excuse to say, hey, he got preferential treatment, he's gone.
Yeah.
When I really needed it. And that's the kind of sacrifices we're making in this profession. And so, you got to think about the bigger picture when you're in disaster, and you got to think about yourself. And that's the biggest lesson I would share with anybody is take care of yourself, take care of your team. Somewhere in there, you've got to take care of your family, and it will come together.
Yeah.
And if you get a chance to work a disaster, do not miss that opportunity. It's the best learning you'll ever get. And I don't care if you're just sitting there and saying, okay, I'm going to ride around with the National Guard, or I'm going to get on a helicopter and fly with the Forest Service. Fine, go do that. And those opportunities came up for me. They're like, hey, you want to go out with the Guard? We're going to do high water trucks. We're going to go back in these caves and hollers and go visit people, make sure they're okay. We're going to go get wet and get dirty today. I've done that. You all go experience that. Hey, you want to get on a helicopter and go fly around, do aerial reconnaissance today? We got 3 helicopters and got two fixed wing aircraft. We're going to take a bunch of people, cameras. I've done that. My team needs to go. And I would look back over as like, anybody here not done this before in a disaster?
Get that exposure, get that experience.
Get on the ground, get over there, get to the airport, go. Because I've been there. I don't need to take another person's seat. That's not, my job is to make sure if I go down, any one of them there in the next disaster can do my job.
I think one of the takeaways that I would like for those who are listening to get from this is, man, if you have that initiative and you're proactive and you have that fire, you can find something to do, and you can elevate yourself professionally speaking by getting exposure to those experiences, right? That you would not normally get in a time of crisis or chaos. I mean, those are the best times in the world to really get that exposure and get that experience and learn not only about who you are as a person, who you are as a leader, but how to help your community, how to help your organization.
Yeah. I don't know if we've talked about this, but maybe, do you do like, and this is a weird thing on a podcast, but is there like an attachment somehow?
I could put something in the show notes.
We can give them our checklist and say, here's the things,
please do.
And I'll type it up and send it to you, and I'll try to make it short because I don't know how much space you have. But
no, I have as much space as you want. If you want to give me a PDF, I can I'll host that PDF somewhere and I'll put in the show notes. So
yeah, just say, guys, it's too much for everybody to learn. It's taken me 25 years of doing this to figure it all out, and I still learn every day. That's the other thing, is that every disaster is different, right? And so you're always learning. And so start with a checklist, develop your own checklist, and I'll give you some of my notes, and you take and build your own.
Absolutely, right? Donald. You get that to me, I'll put it on the show notes and share it with the audience.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, Donald, I appreciate you being on the show. I've really enjoyed it. I think we had a really interesting discussion, a useful, beneficial discussion about some pretty heavy issues and topics related to emergency management. Thank you for being a guest on the show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate everything you do for our profession.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. If you enjoy the content, please hit that follow, subscribe button. If you have not left a rating and review on Spotify or Apple, please do so today, and catch you next week.